Consternation crickets, isn't it? We don't think it is, but it is. Apparently we've got a lot of fear going on, and that keeps us from actually engaging. Or we always respond seemingly in the wrong way. We don't understand it's a organized situation that we're up against, and so we have to be as organized, and a lot of people don't want to do that. Before I get too much farther, I think I'll need an audio check. RLM chat, if you please give me an audio check. I've had a serious problem develop right before the broadcast, so I hope I'm getting out right now. Not sure if I am or not. If not, I hope we can get another file running, and then I'll have this on post. Well, I'll continue doing the broadcast, and I'll post it later. This should be for those of you on Pastcast, Prodcast, and Recast, and you see why on Thursday's Recast. This is BTWRLM219, I believe. And I got a crickets response out of RLM. Let's hope that's a little better. Again, I don't know what's really happening at this point with that. And excuse me for being quiet. I'm still working through the problem. It's I don't know what happened, what's gone on. Just a bunch of things just changed, as they sometimes might. And so let's keep going in regards of. Remember last week I was talking to you about terrorist is us. Is us, is. Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it. Thank you, Vin E. Glad you all could tune in. And thank you for all that tuned in last week through the Spreaker and the YouTube account. Appreciate all the listens. 2 weeks before, I was talking about the terrorist is us. And we got this whole thing rolling on the war of terror. Not the war on terror. That's what they want to tell you. But it's the war of terror made by those that can foist it on the whole world. And that's only one entity, and that's apparently the prison industrial complex being allowed by the psychopaths in Washington, D.C. And so I want to run through a couple things today, then get on to a topical thing that has happened in the last week, more of an application thing. And maybe give us an idea of how we have to really look at our problems, our condition, when these people in the United States, really everywhere, come against us. They're coming at us without really any authority, but they're coming with what appears. It's the appearance of authority. It's the color of authority. And so they're not going to admit out of it. They're not going to tell you that's what it is. You have to know enough, and you can't. This is not one of those things that you walk in there and tell them all you want, all you know. You have to figure out how, you have to know how they're going to try and literally evade what law is and try to continue to put legal on you. And so that was what I was concerned with. I'm now having apparently a volume problem. Let me try and raise this up. I don't have apparently I'm having a problem on the pass-through, and I'm not sure why. And so if it's tolerable with the audio, I think I'd rather just let us go with that. And I will hope that the Blogcaster file will be good enough. I can build it up. Anyway, sorry for the technicals here, folks. It's either that or we don't have a broadcast today. I really don't know what happened. Everything was fine. You know, we broadcast from the new setup from last week, so I knew it was fine. It was working last week, so I'm not sure what's gone on. I don't have the time to go back to it. But let me go through a couple things to let you know this war of terror and how it was all coming down on you. And tried to tell you, and been trying to inform you on what to look for and how you're going to have to start positioning yourself as everything gets locked in. And I told you back in 2010, the memo told us they went extrajudicial, and therefore there would be no remedies, there would be no real courts. There would be only you standing against the criminal and doing your best to avoid the worst of what they're going to throw on you. And hopefully enough of us would start coming back together, and it would be the numbers would allow us to help stop a lot of this. And it was going to be the mass of the people, the educated mass, as Thomas Jefferson told us, if we didn't know ourselves, and we probably don't, and we don't agree with that, and we don't really believe in all this stuff, and we will use every excuse not to really engage, roll up our sleeves and engage. We will be more than happy to at least wait until the problem is on us before we even begin to think about it, and then we respond out like we would in any natural consequence of being stomped on. You're just going to do, the fight, flight, or whatever. You're not going to run away too far, and that's the other thing you'll find out. So there's a whole lot of problems that we wait too late. I've been trying to bring the message here behind the woodshed, give you the principles of how to anticipate this. It's not just your knowledge. It really is not your knowledge. That just gets you almost into trouble. It's how are you going to formulate the plan to counter the crime that's against us. And the fact of that crime against us should be your notice that you don't live in the place that they told you, given that you were told you had some sort of idea of freedom. I bring this up in many different potentials and possibilities. I can show that we look like we live under the Lieber Code, and I'm using that specifically because that came up with an email. I'm going to address some problems, and with regard to a video that's come up that a lot of people are passing around. And it's a good starting source, but it doesn't explain how you interact with these criminals that are the criminal just us, not you. You're not in that. In the criminal justice, it's a name. It's almost a noun. It tells you what you're up against. So this whole war of terror was coming after everything you own. Remember, in the battlefield, the usurper, the plunderer, the occupied force comes in and can take everything to aid it, and that will include whatever you have. And it's been tempered a bit, although there's no guarantee that they understand not to mess with production. And that so happens to be what I've found myself in here these 15 years now, I think, going on with the mining law and the law of the land and that kind of thing. But here, I'm trying to tell you to get out of the offered finances, monetary system, because it's coming to be taken up, and that again, this new cashless society was told to us in a book quite a few dozen centuries ago, and coming now into fruition. And I told you, be careful. Bitcoin is that part of that trap. Ethereum is part of that trap. I've done another broadcast just here recently about that. In fact, I can't remember now. I just did found an article that was talking about somebody's actually engaging Ethereum. I think a government is engaging Ethereum to become part of their system. So those of you that are more thinking more about that, you know that. So this is what's coming down. But now here we have a news of what's coming. Whether or not it makes it through, I don't know. A Senate bill to force citizens to register cash not in a bank. Violators get 10 years in prison. So now, like they did in gold, to the unknown knowing, back in 1930s, we're looking at the revolution comes around again. It's against you. Now they're going to even take the cash that they produce, this fiat currency, this value that they have in there, is going to be something that they want control of, and that includes Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So this is a total route of everything you were thinking, and they're going to come underneath with the title of this thing is the Combating Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing, and Counterfeiting Act of 2017. And so it's going to go after everything, and it comes underneath what appears to be the civil asset forfeiture power of this that the states are using, which I told you that's all federal. It has to be. And I was reminded after, it's interesting how I forget lots of things, but one thing I did forget I had to remind you, I've talked about it a long time ago. We were talking about these federal districts and the Buck Act and the federal territories that the states, the so-called the state of a state name, were these federal territories. You get zip code is the service, the business service is a zip code. It's private registered property of the federal postal service, not the postal office. That's different. The postal service that is a federal district. That I forgot to mention to you that these federal these states that you think there are that are really looking more like another potential possibility and actually provable. Whether or not it's working in any moment is really the question. And so you got to cover that base as well. But remember, the World Fact Book published by or at least given in the website by the CIA acknowledges states are administrative divisions. And I forgot, just slipped my mind, but I was reminded later on something else that came up right after the broadcast last week that brought that back into memory. That these states, by the CIA, they determined that they understand that these states that you think you live in are administrative divisions, and essentially they're talking from the federal side. So these are administrative problems that we have to work on, and that's why part of what I say is you have to get your records right wherever you go. It doesn't matter where you go, you got to get your record right. And if it's not, and it's not made by pursuant to a plan that you've established, you're probably not going to fare so well. And this becomes the problem of trying to address all these things in all these states and all these different problems that you can get into, with all the potential things you could try to do, and then in face of this organized criminal syndicate that looks like it's legitimate. Well, it's legitimate, fair enough. It's not, but it's not law. It's an imposition. So the states, the administrative divisions, I was telling you, there's no way that the civil asset forfeiture, which is rooted in admiralty, could be administered by the states that we think. These are several states is how it's termed in most of the code. The several states of the Union, I think even more appropriately, that those states cannot do admiralty or civil asset forfeiture. They must be federal jurisdiction. And when you go to the point that the states are, by the CIA, are administrative divisions of the federal government, then it makes more sense. The Buck Act states, or the veneer, as I talked to you before. Again, you're going to hear this come up in a video here in a few minutes. I'm not going to play the video. I'm going to refer to it. And I'm not going to discuss more than I want you to get the broadcaster. I want you to see it and get you a fair idea of how this starts to lay out. It deals in this thing called traffic, but it actually expands into every other aspect that I talk about if you apply it correctly. Although I'm not fully agreeing with all the content of the video. I'll get to that in a second. But when you start laying all this out, there's now going to be a law that's going to ask you to tell the government everything you have, and they're going to put it underneath this idea that they're combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and counterfeiting act. Now, my problem with this is that we have proof and record, and the problem we have is we now know that there's no real court to go to, and so that becomes the final problem. So you really don't have a remedy. You just got to kind of make it as painful for these guys as possible. And that's why it takes a lot more people, because that eases the burden on any one of us in doing this. But we found out that the criminal justice system is a money laundering, we'll call it human trafficking, criminal racketeering organization. That is not an opinion, folks. I told you before how we've got all the record for that. The judges cannot tell you what their authority is when you properly place the right documents of record in and show, given the fraud upon the court, of the fraud, not the fraud upon the court, but the fraud given the documentation that invokes these supposed courts, that they cannot answer to the fact that they can get jurisdiction based on these frauds, and therefore they're committing fraud upon the court. Well, that just runs us right on down into the fact that they're running everybody through as a big business, and it's all theft. It's all plunder, and we call on land booty, given these are federal asset forfeiture proceedings in admiralty. And I'm not going to get into the admiralty side. I've already told you a little bit on how you have to position yourself there. Again, making that record, and that's where the land law came really important to show that part as well. And I've talked all about this. I wish I was a little more organized and to be able to tell you which episode so-called and chapter and verse, but they're out there, and I didn't do it that way, but they're out there. So anyway, so the Senate's trying to go in after up to $10,000. I don't know what this magic number is. If you're traveling around and want to do anything and you have over 10,000, you have to divulge your guts on what it is. Well, this $10,000 has to do with the system and fiat that you're involved in, and it has to do, remember, the citizen. And this will turn around. These words citizen, United States person, resident, all these things come up. You have to understand that status. I've talked to you about the status. You have to understand the presumptions of those statuses on you and how to refute them. And so that's why I told you one of the tricks that I figured out and we can do was to prove a negative. You say, well, how do I prove a negative? Well, I can show you how to prove a negative. When you're dealing with a fiction, you can easily prove a negative. In the regard of you also have to get it from the one who's speaking the presumption against you. So word to the wise, you want to stay in these cryptocurrencies and cash, and you don't want to get into specie as money and do your private contracting so that you also have an impairment of contract problem for the government that comes against you, and other things, the ex post facto impositions and all these things that you can point to an objective basis, notwithstanding the occupation and the usurpers. That's the trouble that you start throwing in their face. If you don't have all this in your mouth to say, or more importantly, get it in writing and make records, and preferably before they do a lot of this, you're going to be suffering this whole the future we want, which is not your future. It's the future that is planned by we'll entitle them to technocrats. Why they want to go to cashless, why they want to get into digital. Another thing, now moving over, we talked about 2 weeks ago, the terrorist is us, is the U.S., is Israel, United States, is this bully in the global bloc. United States deploys mobile artillery rocket launchers in Syria. I want to just quickly touch base to prove exactly what I say. This is a war of terror. There's no basis in law for this. The United States now has put these super sophisticated long-range or mobile artillery launchers that are actually rocket-aided ballistics that are super accurate. They go 300 kilometers. They were repositioned in Syria so they could reach everywhere the Syrian government's armies and infrastructure are. They're made, these rocket launchers, very powerful rocket-launched mobile artillery units, are made to go after command and control. That, by definition, rules out that really doesn't have any force and effect, as as Syria and Russia are combating what Israel and United States are doing in Syria. They're overcoming all that. So when you put a rocket launcher in and position it so you can essentially take out all the command and control of the democratically, if I can say democratically, the population's voting of their government in, you're a terrorist in their country. You're declaring war. You have no purpose. So there's this action right after that broadcast I told you. It proves there's nothing that they're going to fight is with this artillery. They can only go after sophisticated command and control structures that they would need to bring in these units in order to take out that many. And so-called is not that group, notwithstanding all the things that the United States government does to attack Syria, to aid is. And so, not more on that. I just want to point out again, my analysis on the terrorist is us is proven out. The United States has no lawful cause in law, and I told you that was predicted back in, well, you not predicted, that was what they declared was happening, and I predicted for you would be moving into the future was that, again, that 2010 memo, when they even threw out the Lieber Code and imposed extrajudicial impositions. No court means extrajudicial means there's no court. No court means there's no remedy, means you do not have an established tripartite government anymore. I don't know what more to say. That should answer it. But United States is a war criminal sitting in Syria. It wants to take out Syria. It has its own designs. Again, no one sent me the red phone call about why I should be rah USA, USA, USA on this. When my mind and I was brought up that you kept peace in the world and you did everything you can to keep peace, and you did it by diplomacy and statesmanship. And those states weren't so terrible. They were these different types of belief systems of people that lived amongst themselves that allowed us to function, and then international law allowed us those different belief systems to work together, so we wouldn't have to suffer the hordes and invasions. Now, somebody in the United States government decided that the full faith and credit of the United States extended to absolutely no debt limits, and that's That's what funds this whole thing, essentially. I don't even know if that the people have a thing to say about it. If you look enough court cases, you find out it has nothing to say about it. So a lot of people that say end the Fed, they don't know what they're talking about. My thought is, why don't you just go in, I don't know how you're going to do this because I'm not going to let it happen, but you have to end the full faith and credit of the United States. There is none. It uses that open check to write as much as it can, and it gives it the authority to go around and make its fiat currency the kind to use, the only and sole use of the world. And then it has, because of that, it developed the political power, the military power to enforce it. And you're seeing this happening in the United States, in Syria with the United States and this artillery, mobile artillery. So enough of that, I think, here. It's pretty self-evident what's happening, and I'm just shocked. Again, even the Russians that are having to deal with it aren't really calling it out as strongly as I thought that they should. And then that just points out that maybe that's all part of a bigger scam game that's going on, and not necessarily about Syria, generally. But at any rate, I don't know. We can think and conjecture a lot. What I want you to see is that this white knight called the United States, at least the United States government, is not even close. And it's, at any rate, the people, being part of the United States of America, at least the territorial boundary within the territorial boundaries of what we call those united several states of the Union, that reflects terribly on the people, and the people are not like that. And so this is where I tell you about the occupied force, and those people have to throw out what occupies them. I've been telling you this for years and years and years, and there's nothing, no opinion, no statement contrary that's going to change the responsibility that this puts upon any people that is beset against it. More war of terror on us. MonSatan spins doctors target cancer, scientists in Flawed Reuters study. Again, we find as people are reading, and this is one of the cool things about the internet, we can look at all this, and people can go out and research all kinds of interesting things and put it out there when you make your findings. In a well-orchestrated, highly coordinated media coup, MonSatan Corporation and friends this week dropped a bombshell on opponents who are seeking to prove that the company's beloved Roundup herbicides causes cancer. A widely circulated story published June 14th of the global news outlet Reuters, for which I formerly worked, not I, this author, laid out what appeared to be a scandalous story of hidden information, a secretive scientist's exclusive revelations that the story said could be altered, a critical 2015 classification that associated MonSatan's Roundup to cancer and triggered waves of lawsuits against MonSatan. It was a blockbuster of a story, and was repeated by the news organizations around the globe, pushed by press releases from MonSatan-backed organizations, and trumpeted by industry allies like American Chemistry Council. It was also flawed and misleading in a number of critical respects. Author of Reuters report, Kate Kaland, who has a history of cozy relations with the group, partly funded by agrochemical companies' interests, the piece accused the top epidemiologist of the United States National Cancer Institute of failing to share important scientific data with other scientists as they were all worked together assessing that the herbicide glyphosate for the International Agency for Research on Cancer. That group reviewed the wide body of research of glyphosate and determined in March 2015 that the pesticide should be classified as a probable human carcinogen. And this story goes on and on and on. And what it ends up finding out as we go on and on and on, and sometimes I wonder if these people just write this stuff just to make you tired and bored, the so-called independent review was not actually independent, and the one touted by mainstream media that was supposed to be independent was not independent of MonSatan's influence. And so again, the story again is the United States government is a war of terror against you, and it doesn't care to step in to stop this nonsense. And we know we've heard about the revolving door. I bring this up over this long time. This is my PSA side for your health. If we don't have our health and we don't pay attention, they're going to control that, and and they're going to control how you're going to exist and how functional you're going to be. And this becomes part of the power and the dynamic that goes on for you to be healthy, contrary to what experts say. So moving on, and what the FDA does and won't do. The FDA, remember, I was talking about this intravenous vitamin C. Well, and I think I got this from Gary L. On a link. FDA quietly bans the powerful, life-saving intravenous vitamin C. How many weeks was it ago I told you about that article? I got another link. We'll see that again, where the doctor, Norfolk doctor, was curing, I use the word curing, sepsis. Now, this article doesn't talk about its use in sepsis. It talks about it in using in other things, and it gives us an explanation that there was a shortage, and the FDA stepped in to shut down, and so there was a shortage, and so doctors went to compounding pharmacies, and it just so happened at the time that a compounding pharmacy was making some other material, injectable material, and there was a fungus in that material. So we see the problem with these independent labs at one level, but that was only one on a different injectable prescription drug, and the FDA came in and did a broad ban on all compounding agencies to make all IV vitamin C, without any proof that any of the other ones were having a problem. And so what this does is it puts pressure on the availability of all IV vitamin C, and the doctors can't go and get that vitamin C. So when we found here already that a doctor has cured sepsis, and they use it for other things, and this was also other injectable minerals, the FDA shuts it all down, that they're shutting down a viable cures for you in favor of the pharmaceutical companies. It is a war against you. Now, I didn't read any more deeper about how this worked. I just know in my comment to, I think it was Gary L., was the first person anyone that dies of sepsis, at least of sepsis, should give a premeditated murder charge on those making the decision to stop making such a broad ban on all compounding pharmacies for injectable vitamin C. No, that's just an opinion, I suppose, but some of you all should be ready to go make those big nasty noise complaints against the agency and against the Sessions, the Attorney General, and send letters and say, why are you allowing this? This is a violation to people. This is not health care. This is actually premeditated murder. And so crickets are going to win the day here, folks. I'm just telling you. In a place, in a land that's occupied by these psychopaths, crickets are going to win the day. And you're going to really, eventually at some point, really not appreciate that point, I don't think, at all. A game changer, study finds 100-year-old drug reverses autism symptoms in kids. Your little goats can have your symptoms of autism reversed. And just a little story for you. I didn't want to get too deep. Just the fact that you got a kid with autism, maybe this could help them. This little old drug, actually, it was. What I found interesting, what really caught my mind was this drug called Suramin was first developed in 1916 and used as an anti-parasitic drug for treating African sleeping sickness and river blindness. And now there's some side effects, so don't think this is a cure-all, but it could help, and it does, and they say it does help, and I suppose, watch very carefully, it could help. A single dose is all that it takes. One of the other problems is it doesn't last forever, so it's got to be continual. The point is, it is addressing this symptoms again of autism. And what I found interesting was that it's kind of got me thinking of quinine and malaria. It's going after sleeping sickness and river blindness. And what might they be putting in these vaccines and these other chemistries that they give us that changes DNA? or that alters our biology, and that what's involved. Remember, the FDA stopped the one compounding pharmacy making an injectable pharmaceutical that wasn't vitamin C, is something else, but they used it to ban. They used that fact that it had fungus in its vaccines. Where does that fungus come from? That was thoughtful. Why didn't they figure out how to get rid of that? But here it is. What are they allowing in these pharmaceuticals they allow? What are they allowing that would cause symptoms that a drug for sleeping sickness and river blindness would help to alleviate? I think, gets your mind over to monkeypox and things like that. They're putting stuff in these pharmaceuticals that are that again are not good for us. They're allowed to go underneath the radar. Big bucks. They get you to be in the revolving door, stuck in the revolving door of side effects in pharmaceuticals and the big costs of that. Then they got you trapped. You're going to be focused on your little one. You get involved. You're going to be in that. You're not going to be of any import to anything important. If you considered your way of life important to keep, you will be of no way. They will have you controlled in that vicious circle of the pharmaceutical trap. So I wanted to point out, for those of you that have maybe check into this autism symptom reduction in this Suramin chemical. Again, not a cure-all, but at least it can reduce the symptoms. And apparently the little goats that you have come back out and they're really able to function again. So we might want to look further. Again, don't look at the effect. What's causing a condition in those kids, the little goats, when they get injected with the vaccines and other things that makes a sleeping sickness remedy work on them? May be a place where we might start. Moving over on to these other tumors in the world, we call it scientists now. I just can't. Not that I don't like all scientists. That's not the point. But the consensus scientists here. This is all based on this consensus. All these things are brought in by consensus. That's an international imposition. This revolving door with the international multinationals is consensus, where they won't allow the precautionary principle either, but they will say that the experts say it's fine, and then you find out that these companies or any other these people that are doing these studies are in the bag of those that are the conflict of interest of those that are needing this profit. And we have nobody to check and balance that. That should be a hue and cry of everybody, pitchforks and torches. And again, the crickets are going to win the day there as well. That consensus science, I've told you on record over and over again, is a crime against humanity. It's all you monster animals out there, it's a crime against you. So how much worse is it to men and women? So we get on to consensus science, and we get on to this climate change. And just a brief note on how nuts it gets. The proof is in the pudding over and over, and until what you may not understand is that carbon tax and all that other stuff, it's working on you. Your transportation, modal transportation, it's all based on this. Your constrictions on the use of your roads and the worsening of your traffic is all planned, or your travel is all planned. And this is all kind of where it starts, and it starts from people who claim to take the title of science, and they're really not, or consensus, and that's a process of destruction, and people don't understand that. And a little story came up. What a mess. Spiegel reveals scientists don't know real temperature of the planet. The German-based European Institute of Climate and Energy, EIKE, that is now obvious. Nobody really knows the real mean global temperature is, and that claims that the planet is the hottest it's been since measurements are not making any sense. In 1995, it was 15.4 degrees centigrade. Today, we are told it's 14.8, a new record. No more talk about it. Again, this is just the crux of what I was telling you. This is just a relationship to a statistical relationship to a hypothesis that hasn't even, to a ratio of a hypothesis that's never been proven. And we see by their own promotion that obviously 14.8 is not more than 15.4 happening in 1995. 14.8 degrees centigrade happened in 2016. They're claiming it as new record. These people are absolutely crazy. And this is consensus science. This is consensus anything. As long as you buy into the outcome, you're going to be given the kudos, and everybody that doesn't believe in this is going to be a mental retard, have mental problems, and be a heretic outright. And as long as you, again, the crickets will win. The crickets here are going to win because you're silent on this nonsense. Now, they may have the right to print that lie because they have a freedom of speech, but you don't have there's no need for you to buy into it, and you have every right to respond to condemn it. I don't know why more people don't. The problem with this global mean is that we don't have the scientific, well, we're trying to do it with satellites, so they can't do it either. They have problems with those. Trying to have enough thermometers everywhere to get an actual good sampling. It's just not possible right yet, even with satellites. So they can't do the global mean. It's just not it's just an average. It's just an average of whatever measurements you took. It doesn't mean it's accurate. And we have a problem with measurement. I've told you this over and over and over. The biggest problem with an electronic engineering analysis for powers and consumption and inputs and outputs is how you take your measurements and what you're doing into that circuit, how you interfere with the circuit. Are you even measuring what you think you're measuring? Are your system actually seeing what it's supposed to be testing? We don't know. It's a big wild guess. You just try to have the next mind that can see, oh, well, wait a minute, we had a little bit of a problem. When we put our input here, we made an inductive or capacitance addition to the circuit, which had an effect on it, which changed our output. The circuitry we use, the math we use, looked accurate enough, but it's only within a certain range. Now we have to have a whole bunch of different types of power units because we don't know. Some are good at 100% to give us top end. Some are only good for 75%. Some are only 72.3% because we don't even know what we're doing. Then it's all limited by the technology itself, the accuracy with which we are receiving this stuff. And so they don't have enough to do the global mean. And so all they can actually tell you is the highest temperature. Some measurement was taken somewhere. And in 1995 it was hotter, and yet the publications today are saying a lesser temperature today, or for last year, was the new record. And this is the lie that continues to go on that I don't hear many people really calling out. Or they call it out and then they be quiet about it. They don't really rail about that. Even this point, how can a 14.8 degree temperature in 2016 be higher than a 15.4? I don't even need to get into theories. I don't have to get in science. I don't need to get into anything. Who's the lunatic that believes that? And who are the scientists that believe that? The consensus who are these people? Now, when you question them, they don't want to answer you. And that's right where you know you're right on. That's where I go. When I come into a place and I've got my research up and I've done it right, and you go talk to someone who's a pretender or a criminal, or didn't know they were a pretender or a criminal, they have to shut up, and they do shut up. Now, the problem will be for us is on the other side where that seat of decision can't remain silent, and then it does, and then that silence causes a problem. And so we have a different angle to hit on all this. We have to look very carefully at the territory, as I call it, our battlefield. And I will say it again, whether you want to believe this or not, we all are thrown into these battlefields naked. Absolutely naked and unprepared. And I don't know what to say more than that's the fact. And we can make up a difference. We can make it up that it's different, but the fact is it's not. We can put our head in the sand and make up stories too, and fairy tales and unicorns and rainbows. That's just us making excuses and telling ourselves dangerous tales. And thank you, P. Bunyan. As I look down one little line, got to mention Happy Father's Day to all your dads out there, fathers. Happy Father's Day to all you fathers and your dads. This is on you, too, folks. All you fathers have got a responsibility. It didn't end. Remember, you know that. It didn't end. All the fathers also have to step up. They're doing this to your little ones. Your offspring is being harmed. just think if I get lost in some of this conversation, these thoughts that we have, we really are harming ourselves, and we didn't stand up to the responsibility. They didn't make it easy, but that's not an excuse. And I don't know what to say more. I have to shake my head. Anybody that comes up with any kind of an excuse not to engage is, I don't really know what to say to that. There's no excuse. It doesn't, even if you have coming up with an excuse, that's not an excuse enough to not engage somewhere, somehow. Waiting, delay is harm. Even delay, if you get into law, delay is injustice. And there's an interesting thing that they don't find out about the delay, and they won't admit. We've heard about the speedy trial. When you start looking at, when you start getting into court cases, you find out they don't care about that. You have to go in again and say, well, I guess then it may be that I'm not in that constitutional frame. Maybe I'm not before people that recognize that or care to recognize it. And if that doesn't straighten you up, to have a rethink, I don't know what to tell y'all. This is exactly the fact. I don't know how many cases I've been worked on to my own and some others where the speedy trial provision is ignored completely. And they just want their plunder. And so that is an education. You find out that, and then you realize that's the reality, and you kind of waste your time figuring that one out. And the next time you understand that's the point, and you don't rely on it so much. What you do is you find out the evidence that you need in order to show they didn't intend to follow the law. And so we change the focus on what we're doing. And this gets me into now this video. It went around to quite a few people that I know of, and a few people talked to me about it. I sent it back out, and I want people to see this, because the woman that's talking here in this video she's a researcher, an applier of her research like I am and have been. I won't say that I completely agree with what her positions are, but for most people who haven't heard this, she does read some laws out of California, which are very instructive. I appreciate California in a large part, because if you just slowly read their vehicle code, their so-called traffic code, they will tell you exactly in there. It's not like others. It's not like other states. Like Oregon is so obscure. There's only one. Well, unless you read enough of it, read the motor vehicle code, you really are hard pressed to see that it's a commercial code. You have to go to the rules implementing the code, and one place, there's only one place I've found that it shows that it's specifically relating to business. The whole code specifically relates to business. So each state handles their contrivances, their obstruction to your clear knowledge differently. And each state handles its corruption of that court its own way too. And so you have a lot of things that have to be considered in this. So I want to get on to this woman who drives without license and tells how. There's another Jerry Day video, which I appreciate Jerry Day a lot. Never talked to him. His account on YouTube is Minivan Jack. Just pointing it out so that you can go to. You'll get the link later if you want. But I want to point out Jerry Day, to all his credit, of making his concise statements and intellectually straightforward comments. In this video, he doesn't understand the subject matter at all, and I don't want to go through the whole video. I'm just going to hit a couple points. We could talk for quite a bit on this, and it depends on what you're up against. But we start out with him introducing this woman named Jackie Fig, I think. Now, she happens to be an English woman in California. And she's gone through the studies, and I can, listening to her, I follow my own trace and knowledge of years and years ago. She found out a lot of the same stuff I did, the way it works, and so I have no problems with that. The things that you won't hear in the video is really what to do about it. You have to understand she's touted as a hero, which I suppose she could be considered. She's not the only one, folks. I know dozens of guys and a couple of gals that have done this, and it all turns out to be ultimately the same end at this point. You'll realize she's gone through. Don't miss the fact that all the jurisdictions have beat her up, and she's still standing. And the point is that they're still trying to beat her up. And she gets you go through these cycles of lulls. They leave you alone for a while, and then they get you again, and then they go to lull, and then they leave you alone, and they get you again. And your life is a perpetual harassment. And so you won't get out of this video what to do about it necessarily. But she goes through this process and explains for you, not only that she hits the Buck Act, like I've told you myself. She doesn't hit the occupied territory, but that's a consideration. She hits who this law is actually over and why. And you need to hear that. Whether or not you ever do anything over that, you need to hear what this is about this state imposition is about, this administrative state imposition. Because that starts to form in your mind that jurisdiction that we talk about, that I keep telling you they have to stay within, and they have no right to drag you in, but they have the presumptions that assume you in, and why you have to fight the presumptions for your benefit. Now, she doesn't talk about these things, but this is why you got to get the basic knowledge before you can start understanding where I would take this beyond. One thing I didn't understand in this is where she understands later, she tells you that she knows about the so-called straw man, and those people that have researched that don't get all lost up in it. It's a fiction. That's simply what it is. The fictions are not necessarily bad. Fictions in law are not bad if they accomplish a good thing that is hard to describe, or a condition that can be hidden by artifice. I don't mean the artifice of the lawyers and the judges. I mean just a real artifice. And you have to create these conditions, this temporary status in order to get to the problem, to give a justice. And after you read enough, you see that they're not necessarily all bad. The way they're holding this presumption against us, it is bad. And then you have a whole system of plunder that puts us, it creates a fiction that it presumes us to be that, and we confess into it all the time. And that's my problem with some of this, is that we are all different points along this continuum. This woman has fought when she found out about how this worked. She tried to do it. She did her communications with the state. She says she has evidence that says that she understood that correctly, that there's two statuses at least. Well, let's just put it two statuses. One that's engaged with the administration of the government, and one that's outside of it. Despite that, again, she can't get the courts to recognize any of it, and the local police want to harass her, and you'll always get one cop that wants to prove a point to you. And so that's not the law. That's a big violation. And again, there's just not enough of us that understand some of this. The position that she takes, though, relative to the straw man, which she does understand, and she doesn't, I can tell she has a whole lot more in her to say that was not part of this video. But she refers, and I want to caution you against something here. She'll refer to creating a foreign trust. And then she says something that she blows right by, that you can't. She says that the foreign trust required that she have an EIN. And that should send warning signals to everybody. That once she understood the straw man, there was no need to go use a foreign trust. The foreign trust creation of which is a commerce entity, an entity in commerce that she created, requiring an EIN. That's IRS. That's federal again. And so I'm concerned that she's actually created something she didn't even need to create to do the very same thing. When you understand that the relinquishment, the change of possession that any title refers to, it voids the certificate of title, prefers it into the one of possession, and if that one is a resident somewhere, they have a grace period of 30 days in most jurisdictions. The resident does. I don't mean you if you're a man or a woman, but the resident is now required and given a 30-day grace period to then get it re-registered in this state of residence. And she goes through this term, in the state. Very important to get this. And so when you understand what's going on, she doesn't need a foreign trust to take it out of possession of the straw entity that possessed it. If that entity just sends a letter in and says, this name has no more possession. It's been however you want to do it. I would say grant it out of possession of the legal entity, and don't tell anybody where it went. And you do that by lawful contract, which requires an agreement. What is it? 4 areas. I don't really run that through, but it needs consideration. So you just put that it was granted for valuable consideration on a day between the parties. And so you don't have to you don't have to make a foreign trust to get it out of that. And I think that's a danger because it kicks in the IRS's foreign status. And so be cautious about creating another legal entity, especially one in the state and especially a foreign. Remember, when we look at from the jurisdictional standpoint, a resident is an alien. And they're foreign unless you're in Washington, D.C. And so you got to really keep track of a lot of these things. Now, getting back to the woman who drives without a license. Well, that title's wrong. As I say, Jerry Day doesn't understand the terminology. I wanted you to keep very important. I want you to go in the beginning of this video and listen to her opening answer. I think it's within the first couple minutes. She says it right. And Jerry Day tries to make it understandable to the common street language and puts it in his terms, and he's not correct. She has it right. What they also don't do is they mention it, but they don't make much of an importance on that application, how it gets started. She also doesn't tell you that your license, this license that you think you have, this thing you hand to the cop that you answer, that isn't the license. That's not the acceptance of the jurisdiction. That little document with your signature is a picture of your signature accepting the application of the laws that the officer is imposing upon you that you asked to be imposed in enforcement. That the certificate, the little document you call the license that you have in your pocket, is actually evidence of the application of the law that the cop is going to apply to you, and he now sees that, and he now has the right to apply that law. And so this thing works a little differently than most people say, and I don't hear her saying that. If she understood, maybe she does, and maybe it's just a matter of getting it out. But there's a deeper understanding on the dynamic of the do part, the actual functional part about this. You can't be as loose on it as to go as far as reconstructing a sentence or an opinion like Jerry Day does. And you also got to be careful about going in and believing that she has found the correct pathway. She has the knowledge, but I think that's all considered a question depending on whom you're going to meet out in the real world. When I put her name in a search engine, it was she has quite a few court cases. Whether or not they're done or not, I don't know. But see that various jurisdictions start dogpiling on you as well. You have to understand all this. So this is very important. I think you need to see it. And one of the more important things she brings up in relating to this application thing, where the court case speaks to licensing, she brings up a case called O'Neill versus the Department of Professions and Vocational Standards. I found a copy of it. You'll have a link in the blogcaster. It's a really short read. It happened back in 1935. Well, this is important because that's the administration. That's when the federal administration gets imposed on everybody in Roosevelt's time, wasn't it? So this is important, and it's also federal. I don't know. I can't remember. The Buck Act wasn't until the 40s. So, and then you see in 46 you get the administration of the departments of the agencies. The agencies step up in that time. So if you look carefully, it's a progression of implementation that goes on. But this court case, and let me just read you need to read just how this develops. It was somebody who didn't have a contractor's license, and it was a California case. and was caught up by the contractor board. And this was interesting to me a bit, not that I got so deep in it, but if you look very carefully, there's a status that you have. This is what this is all about. What status? What state are you in? Are you in the state that they have, in this state, or in a different one? And can you prove it? And you not just talk about it, can you prove it? Or can you prove theirs is not imposed upon you? And so my view a long time back was people were coming to me about, they were working contractors, building houses and things. Well, do I need to get a license? And I worked it out and found, no, it says right here, you don't. If you work on private contracts, you don't have to have any of this stuff. You're not under the board, and they can't impair your obligations of contract. You can't impair your right to contract. They can't impair your right to your private livelihood. They only can do this thing within their purview in the state. And that didn't matter whether or not that's the occupied state I could find in 53, whether it was just a rogue occupier generally, or whether it was the federal veneer that set over, or if it was a different style of federal administration. It didn't matter. See, because there's this underlying vested property that each one of us, men and women, have. That this court case speaks to the fact that there is a separate nature, and it says essentially, well, let me read it. We think it is clear that neither the Department of Professional Standards, nor the Bureau, nor the officers provided for by the Act herein under consideration, nor any other official acquired any jurisdiction of petitioner to consider or make any order, and that the order made is null and void. This, of course, because petitioner herein was not a licensed contractor at the time of the proceeding, which is precedent necessity before any action is authorized. The judgment of the Superior Court is reversed with direction that it adjudge and decree that the order made by the Registrar of Contractors be declared null and void for lack of jurisdiction. What is our first question to these people? What's your subject matter jurisdiction? He may have it, and he may be able to try to attach it to you. But if they don't have the jurisdiction up front, and you can challenge jurisdiction at any time and repeatedly, given the status, the facts that it may come, these administrative functionaries have no jurisdiction to make, and no power, therefore, to make an order against you. What this one case she brings up is very important when you start to understand about not having the license and what to do. That brings my mind to another thought she says. She refers to, and this is California law. Again, California law is pretty clear. It doesn't translate to many other states, but it's really clear in California. So you see what it pertains to in California. You just got to kind of work harder to apply it in other places. But you're going to be up against the plunderer, the non-independent of the state plundering agency, which you'll find out the courts are in this capacity. They'll deny it. This has got to, I don't know, see, people who haven't argued this don't understand all this. You can argue exactly what she says that she sees, and she'll tell you, and she'll read it right on the statute, the code, that these are commissioners of the administration of the motor vehicle code, not judges. Is administrative commissioners. You go and challenge that. For the most part, I've never seen the court agree to that. They will say that they are not administration, and in the administration of the motor vehicle code. And so that now when you see that and you realize, well, the statutes say one thing and these people are saying something else, you're in front of a criminal. And they have the power, they have the power, the force, the violence and power behind them to make what that signature on a piece of paper says is so. And this is the real problem for us. But wanted to point out that it does require the application. You can't get the license unless you fill out the application, and that required your signature. And what she says is that she's now identified a form, and I only want to call your attention to it because in the words of the video, I'm going to conjecture something which I don't think is so conjectural, that she tells me what this form is. She refers to I think it's a DL142 form. And then she says, but, and this is where I think she doesn't quite get and understand, but I want you to know, and for her, it's just a matter of pointing out these things, and she'll pick it all up. This is not a fault of hers. This is just, again, not having things put together like I may not have things put together. I have these things put together. That DL142 form requires you have a reason to cancel. They call it cancel the driver's license or whatever, whatever their form is. Well, when she said you have to have a reason, and then she said, well, like a mistake or an error or something like that, folks, she also mentions UCC. And UCC is where your remedies are for contracts and goods and all these things that it sits in the code to impose. That was actually adopted by the federal government in 1963, and then it's adopted again by the states and is supposed to conform to the idiosyncrasies of each state. But the UCC is pretty uniform. It's a uniform code. Okay? And so it's pretty uniform throughout the states. Is how they unified everything and brought it together. They kept them from being separate. UCC has a remedy in it that you need to have a reason to cancel something. I've talked to you about it over and over again. She doesn't seem to have that awareness of what that form might be, but just on her scant description, I will tell you that form is a rescission notice to the state. And you go to UCC for rescissions, your remedies are rescission, and you'll see what the form for California, you go get the form and read it. I wouldn't use their form, I would just use the remedy. And you would rescind what? The application? No. The license? No. You rescind the signature that gave consent to all the other consent to be served and all this other stuff. It's really amazing to listen to her, and you can hear exactly how and what you're being imposed by when you give these consents. You agree. I keep telling you, it's an applique. You stick it to yourself. You stick it to you. You done it. The problem is when the presumption attaches and you haven't done it. You have to come up with other things because they're criminals, and so you have to out the criminality. But the DL142 is essentially what I could tell, and I haven't looked at it. You can mark on thebshow.com. Correct me if I'm wrong. When she said it needed a reason and gave the two things that she said, I said that's rescission. That's in the UCC under remedy for these documents and getting rid of them. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm telling you to understand that they're there and they're tools. There's a big step that goes on when you start to pull this off. And you start to understand. And the main step is you're up against a criminal, ultimately, in the system. And we really don't have that answer yet. You have to understand there's something terribly, terribly wrong when you can find a judge doing money laundering, racketeering, human trafficking, without jurisdiction. They agree, they have no authority to do what they're doing, and they continue, and the sheriff will back them up. You have to know there's a problem. If you don't, you're really not wanting to pay attention, or you're not paying attention, and it was your responsibility to pay attention. So let's get back to the point of this thing. You don't have an application that gave the license. The authority and the code enforcement authority is void of jurisdiction to enforce their code. Was probably the biggest takeaway. That you understand that you may not ever get recognized by any of the courts. So that means you have to do more. And that is a totally different thing that starts to, it's almost a different world that you have to enter into in combating the crime against us. And when we don't, they win. And so I'd like to move over now without, in a continuing theme about these so-called traffic matters. I got an email, and I don't want to get too private with it. It's not that it's so private in a way, but it is. And so I wanted to touch some things. And the problem I'm having with this sort of a situation is we're not dealing in things to trifle with. And I got some return email. That's understood. The emailer returned that's understood. And so I really, because it's not to trifle with, it's not just something that I would analyze and here's what you need to do. This really is a complete understanding, and it's a complete look at what you have going and not going. This issue is really just a traffic issue that blew up a bit, and they're looking at like 5 years of jail time if this thing goes south on them. That's been running for over 2 years. Now, I got bored with it all at 8-9 months because I figured like you can take these things out forever just about. Well, this is one of those cases that they are, but they're looking at a lot of time and they got a lot of responsibility. That I wanted to talk a little bit about this on the broadcast, even as loosely as I can, because I can't really type everything, and I don't even know if what I'm going to talk about is sufficient. But I did want to convey these ideas to you all to maybe help to bring your mind into what's required. One of the things that I was concerned with, and this is someone who came to me who has listened to apparently a lot of other people and found me through my interviews with Clint Richardson. And the review here was that it does look like we're under the Lieber Code at some point. But remember, I tell you, don't make absolutes. Just fight it like you're there without talking about it. Just start positioning yourself with your record. And that became the main question for me. Over 2 years of time, I'm behind the scenes. I'm behind the times on this whole thing. I don't know what's happened. I don't know if it went right. I don't know if it went wrong. I'm a little bit amazed that it's gone for 2 years and it's still going on, except that enough was learned in order to keep the problem in the air for the court system. They really do it wrong, and you can find them out. So since I didn't know where we were, and I don't know whether or not it's there's been a plea made, I can't go on and say, well, no, you need to remove your plea. That has consequences potentially too, but that would be something I might look at now that you see 2 years down the road and they aren't doing anything except for delaying the case. Well, delay now, speedy trial and delay. If you can show it wasn't based on your problem, you can hit them with speedy trial, which they don't listen to, but at least you make the record. So what's this record I'm trying to look at in regards of, well, the woman says that what she's found is that there's these two, I'll just use two statuses. One is within commerce and one's not. She also doesn't talk about what I tell you about is this underlying use of the road by the grants of Congress, and then the additional point where I say, why don't you make a record of whether, and in some regard, challenge that law imposed upon you is contrary to the United States grant of the highways to Congress to you. See, none of those laws, these state laws can come contrary to a federal authority. And so this is another document you would throw in, and it would be like a show cause. My view on this is that because he's having trouble with the judge, and there's been some judicial complaints here, and they don't do anything, and that's par for the course. See, I'm looking at a lot of things that we've all done that really come to no end at some point, is to put even more pressure on them, is that you start doing things like the quo warranto. Given you don't have a citation that's clear, that they did put that paperwork in, although they didn't ask for the verified complaint. So I asked them that. You should put and that's what the woman says too. The lady in California says demand a verified complaint. That's where the complainant declares the harm to them. That's where you get to your victimless crime thing. If there's no valid verified complaint and you can find in your state the statute requiring it, then you don't have a complaint before the court. Then you go after now you got that record, then you go after the judge for jurisdiction, which a quo warranto is nothing more than, how do you have jurisdiction over this complaint that isn't verified? How do you have jurisdiction over the case and me? This is not a territorial argument, this is the personam argument. And so, with all this knowledge this emailer has, it seemed to me there was almost too much information and not enough taking that information and put it in a cohesive plan on the step-by-step process of making a record that clearly shows there is no authority, not by your opinion, not by your assertion in question, but the evidence
presented into the record. One of my questions is, I told you, how do you prove the negative? Well, you know this is a legal entity name. I'm not going to get into all of that. So I was thinking a long time ago, and I've told you about how this worked out. How do we prove that negative? How do we say we're not that thing that doesn't exist? Well, it's interesting now. We can go to the secretary. I've done this by letter. Now you can do it on the internet. You go to your state Secretary of State's office and type in the name that's on the citation, and get back from the Secretary of State that entity name, in all caps and whatever, don't get lost in it, just put that name. Put it in, and it'll come back more likely than not that name is not in the state. Copy that from the website so that you get exactly what you need as evidence. And I'd copy every name, and we've done this, copy every name from the Secretary of State, and you show that name does not exist in this state. And I'm referring to that term because that's this state that the lady talks to, that she doesn't talk about this, but I'm showing you how you don't have to worry too much about you being the man and the straw man being the fiction. They have jurisdiction over the straw man by presumption to benefit that. You have to just show it doesn't exist. One of the quickest ways I know is to get a Secretary of State to say that it doesn't exist in the state. You then make an affidavit that you got the information from the Secretary of State, and that you, in fact, now you can go back to UCC. You don't need notaries and stuff. You just make an affidavit. You're supposed to be a man or woman of your word, and the presumption is that you are, and you are innocent. Remember that recent Supreme Court case that you're presumed innocent? So you throw that in there. You're presumed innocent, and in absence of a verified complaint, or in absence of the person that can be cited, or whatever other fraud you find, the presumption of innocence is absolute by that court case that we just heard just a few weeks ago. And you bring forward the fact with your evidence. There is no name like this in this state that can be cited. The officer's committing fraud, and that's perpetrating a fraud on the court. What's fraud on the court but a denial of due process? Why would you expect a verified complaint from a charge of a name that doesn't exist? And so asking for a verified complaint doesn't get at the point. And it's not you actively engaging the record to show it's not possible. So you're not going to get to all that in that video, and I'm hoping you're hearing it's not that. The big deal is they'll ignore it. The point is that your record shows they don't have a right. Now, where are we going with that? Once you can do, and I do a couple of layers of these violations. Like I told you, we worked out the money laundering. We worked at, it was like stealing the bail when they couldn't show a complaint that had a cause on it that was arrestable on an officer that had no thought about what his jurisdiction was. How do you have a way? See, this is the other problem. Remember, the courts gave the cop can make a decision that's even wrong and contrary to the code if they reasonably believed it. When they say they have no subject matter jurisdiction, they don't understand what you're talking about subject matter jurisdiction. They don't even have a basis to not know or to wrongly know. If you get what I've been saying on how you attack this, that eliminates even what the Supreme Court allowed to the cops. You're defeating the occupier as well. And the question that was raised at the time with this emailer was, I'm not proceeding in commerce. And the cop didn't understand. He doesn't have to understand that. If you hand him the name and the license, that's all he needs to know. You've accepted whatever his enforcement's going to be, and through the courts. And so that's not a proper question. And here's another thing that may not be understood, and I've said it before here. That when you make an application and get it accepted, this is all part of you got to look, there's some absolutely required steps that are going on here. When you see those absolutely required steps, then the government's doing it the way they have to, and it's lawful. Right? Even though if it's only legal, you've asked for it. That you put in the paperwork that you want the law to apply. The evidence that you've done so is in your so-called license that shows your picture and your signature, that's you, and you consented, and they don't have to understand that you're not in commerce or what that means. You've said you're in commerce. And inside that account that's established, there's a two-part account. It doesn't matter that you're operating not in commerce underneath the license. They make a provision for non-commercial travel. But you are accountable for it. These people are pretty sharp how they set this up. So you can't use the question of not being in commerce once you hand them the answer that you have applied this for commerce, but that you're not necessarily in commerce then. It doesn't matter. They just put that, and I think if everyone were to look, all your records would be for everybody that's not in commerce would be on your non-commerce side of your commerce license, the one you applied to yourself, and they took you at your word that you were in commerce in the state. And so you got to be careful about you've already confessed yourself in, you got to be careful about not mixing up and sounding ridiculous and frivolous when you realized after the fact, well, I really wasn't in commerce even though I've got this paper, and you try to straddle that fence. Now, one suggestion, I'm not saying that you do, but I'm suggesting it so you know, because everything you do has a ramification you have to think through. Is you would, what did I say about the rescission and cancellation of your license? Well, why don't you consider the rescission in the case? Consider it. Don't do it. You got to really consider this. You really have to think deeply on this. Consider the rescission of the evidence they thought they got you in commerce, and write up a rescission notice that shows a couple things. One was a fraudulent non-disclosure of the jurisdiction that was imposed, or that would take away your right to use the highways as Congress intended. How about non-disclosure, fraud, and then maybe even just that it was a mistake? And you do this in the context of the case. Once you get the paperwork filled out, you get your evidence. They show very carefully in the video. She says, make sure to get the paper that the action was, get a receipt for the action that was taken to do this. Absolutely, folks. And then she makes another point. Walk into the court, walk into the registrar, whatever it is, and get them to file, date stamp your paperwork. It proves you were there and proves they'd done it and proves what the paperwork was for. And so, rescission works on all things, all documents that documentation that fits the remedy. And mistake, fraud, unconscionability, impossibility, these things are listed. You can see them. There's more. You just go research more. That's the reason you put it up. I usually throw in another part that says if there's anything you disagree with, contact me in 15 days. And explain your disagreement. Outside of that, it's going to be enforce an effect. You also declare that by these things the license is not just canceled or whatever they will say. It's void as a matter of law from the time of the signature, from before the time of the signature. So you have these little additions you put into it. Is it a silver bullet? No. What it does is officially cancels that application. The signature is rescinded. Again, the signature. That's the consent. And so then you bring that as an evidence, and now what do they have? They've got something they acted on, maybe in good faith, the ramifications of this, and they would maybe exonerated from any wrongdoing. So you got to be careful, but you will get a proof in the record that that's not applicable to you anymore as well. So you got to weigh what you're doing. I can't say to do it. I don't know what that's going to do and how that flows out. You are going to be dealing with the people factor, human factor here. They turn into beasts and animals. We don't know how they would respond. I'm not saying don't do it out of fear. What I'm saying is think very carefully on how you're going to do this, what you have as backups, what you're going to do in the main thing. I'd be looking up habeas corpus and have a habeas corpus made with my signature on it. I'd get into this. I'd have a couple of them, and I'd have people that could send them in to the right courts as well. And then you're arguing that they have no jurisdiction and it's retaliation, harassment, whatever, plunder, trafficking like we did. They just want your money. That's money laundering. They can take it through a color of authority. Now let's get to the colors of authority. Every record you have that they have no authority to maintain authority and they continue, your state law should have under theft by extortion, under color of law, or coercion under color are felonies. You incorporate those if it gets nasty, and I'd put those up pretty quickly, especially a case that's been going for a couple of years. What you're doing is you're not leaving a question. Produce the verified complaint. I need to see it timely. If it's not 30 days or whatever timely, then we're going to know that it's not there. You then move on the fact and presume that that's the fact and the truth, to move to dismiss the case for lack of jurisdiction. Once you've did a rescission on your signature, you remove the case you move a case to dismiss for lack of jurisdiction. This O'Neill case tells us that. I was never in as a licensee for this official code to apply. Now, the problem with all this is if you're given that we see it's an occupied force, you want remedy against them. You want to hurt them bad because of what they did. You go to jail because of what they done. That's another analysis that has to be done. You may not be able to get that. And it was acknowledged. I said, what remedy do you expect in a real occupied territory? And it was acknowledged that there would be none expected. And that's fine. We have to have that understanding. So now what are you after is another thought. I guess some level I get feeling like it's a pessimistic view to start saying, well, I'm telling you we have no remedy, so what are you going to do when you're demanding remedy? It's kind of pessimistic. The thing is that I don't feel that it's pessimistic to understand that reality and to push past that likelihood. In other words, when I bring it, it's not likely that you're going to get pushed through the fact of the presumption of the entity being charged and attached to you. It's certainly going to be a whole lot harder for them to say that exists when the Secretary of State says otherwise on an official document. You're going to push past that presumption, and the remedy for the imposition is the fact that they can't apply it. Now you have, they have to make clarification on what their intent was when they did wrongly name it. In other words, this cop made this stuff up then. Where did he get the authority to do that? That's willful on his private part, in his private authority. He's using a uniform as a color of authority to hurt you. Again, I want to look at some of this stuff to talk about it. I wouldn't get too much into the overlay stuff and we get into this federalized thing. Don't get too deep in that on the state level. Under federal law, and you might want to know where you learn this stuff. The federal law, you go learn the jurisdictional stuff. What was that? Title 28. It was Section 80 to 132. See, I've mentioned this, a number of times. You read very carefully, and you see the United States District Court is a territorial court, and the District Court of the United States, there's only two of them. That's the Article 3 court. Now, you're not going to get into the Article 3 court. You'll get in, but you aren't going to get the response that you think a real court does. What you probably get is no answer into it, and you get the default like we did in 2013, which was planned. Again, it was looking at this condition and planning for these habitual actions by the government. A reticent judge to keep causing trouble, that's a difficult problem, but your record probably is not strong enough to show they have no jurisdiction. You continue a question, they continue the authority. You can't recuse them. You can do all the judicial complaints in the world until you set it up that they had no authority to be doing that. And that's not on your say that they have. You can't just say you have no authority. You have to produce the evidence and the documentation in the record that proves it, and then you move independent with that proof. It's a different action than defending the case or running a defense in the case on these traffic issues. I've talked a lot about this in the past shows, which they're throughout my broadcast time, tenure, I guess I got tenure now, that I can't really focus you on any of you in any one place, but it's out there. So there's things you have to learn to focus on, and there's things you don't focus on. You just You prove counter by evidence, not your opinion, and not just an affidavit making the statement. You have to have an underlying proof document. Like when you say that this person doesn't exist, the proof, see the evidence, you attach the affidavit, is the evidence from the Secretary of State. It's backed up. That's two witnesses. Your statement and the Secretary of State as two witnesses makes a fact. Now, do I go state the maxim? No, I just put it in knowing it states the fact and rely on it. So you got to learn when to say, what to say, how much to say. It's not that difficult. You don't try to showboat. You're focused on making a record that's relevant to what your point is. And your point is to show you either didn't get involved, or when you got involved, it was under some kind of a deception of some sort. That's the affidavit for your rescissions on the codified things, or the outright when you don't have and they beat you up. They didn't have an authority. They didn't have an authority at all, and that's how we were able to run through and get the record made without remedy. Get a record made that it's not opinion that you're dealing in a organized criminal plunder racketeering system. And I'm not. You notice I'm not really speaking to the federal problem or the state occupied problem with the Bar Association. I'm trying to focus directly on the evidence of how the system works and treats to make the evidence a simple and clean way in to show there is no authority, not leave it to a question like asking for a verified complaint that may never show up. Put a termination time on it and bring that as a presumption it doesn't exist, and you're innocent. See, and again, a plea, if you went to plea and you didn't do these pre-plea remedies and avoidance, they may take all the time in the world. You may consider, I'm not saying do this, you have to really, again, consider deeply what your actions might cause. The worst of it is they come after you, and that's why, again, you don't have a residence address. You fill out an residence address, they know right where to come. I've talked all about this. But you be careful on them wanting to silence you. It's not a fear, it's an awareness that could happen. You can circumvent a lot of that if you sent the right notices into the right place, and at least make the record, and then again in backup have that habeas maybe sitting there. You don't want to send it to the same jurisdiction that you're doing it. You want to send it to the other jurisdiction and hope you get something there. Again, nothing's a silver bullet. Thought crossed my mind on another question, and I don't see it now. But again, there's nothing. Everything has to be thought out about a ramification on what they're doing. In this video that we were talking about, that she's done all these things. The problem is, I'll tell you, I know lots of people that have done all those things and more. We aren't getting the states to acknowledge that there is any administrative connection, even though there is. We put in the fact that there's no person to be filing a suit, and the paperwork behind that there's there can be no verified complaint. And the fraud is in the citation. The citation becomes the evidence of the fraud by the cop, which no state law actually allows, so he must be in his private capacity. Now you got him on his private side. They can't defend him from that. But you prove it. You just don't say it. It's all on the record first. You bring the records up in evidence. So again, I don't get lost in the Libre code. I just know that's who I may be dealing with. And how do you deal? You got to ask yourself, how do I deal with somebody like that? How do I deal when they delay this case? Well, I think that means your record's not quite as strong as it needs to be to show that they couldn't. They have no jurisdiction to continue a case that doesn't have a named party, and you're not given yours, and you're the man, not the person. You don't even go through all that. You just say that name you have was fraudulently put in. That means that everything that's listed on this citation is a fraudulent imposition, especially this commerce connection. You just identify how it doesn't exist. Am I talking about auto and the definition of motor vehicle? No. Don't have to worry about all that. Now, that was the other question. How to bring federal law into this. That might be a little more difficult. It's not that they're not responding to this emailer about the federal law. That means you're not quite asserting it right as an imperative. The federal law, again, as I said, in entering into this, you have to show again the connection to the state, that it's a commerce relevant code Then you go to and you put out the 18 U.S.C. 31, and you say the state code can't come contrary to that. And because it can't come contrary to this, anyone who takes this case on and imposes it is in violation. And if you're a judge or judicial officer of any nature, you come into felony under federal law, 18 U.S.C. 4. And anyone who looks into this and doesn't arrest the official that's not arresting the case against you is in violation of 18 U.S.C. 3. That's accessory to felonies. And then you bring in your state felonies again. Is that going to mean anything? Probably, maybe not. I don't know. It depends on how tight the system is in the states you are, how much back scratching they do, how much coverage they have. What you are doing is making a record that shows there is no valid complaint, there can be no valid complaint, and everything that's been done is a crime or a felony. Why do you stay on the felonies? Because those are supposed to be a 100% prosecutable by the district attorney, who happens to sit in your traffic case as this maybe in your paperwork. They'll say that the prosecutor has actually charged you. Now, how did the prosecutor charge you without witnessing anything? He's a part of it, or she's a part of it. You bring the same paperwork up against them. And you charge them with this problem, this 18 U.S.C. 4 problem, and then 18 U.S.C. 3. So you bring in you just bring in the referencing of the federal law. You don't have to stand on it. You just realize that this is a commerce. You find this connection to the state law that says it's in commerce. You tie it, then that can't be contrary to this. This 18 U.S.C. 31, the sub 10, I think it is, says it's for hire, even if your state doesn't say that. I'm not doing anything for hire. I would even use that maybe in my rescission notice, that it was deceptive and not disclosed, and you found out after that this was the actual connection, and what was not disclosed is this very narrow use of the highway. Not necessarily what I believe. I actually would put that in, but if you're comfortable, you could. I don't think you need it, is why I could do it if I had to. I'd do it if I had to. I don't know that it's needed. So how to bring in federal law, in my mind, it's really irrelevant in one regard, because you really don't need it if at the point you don't have a person or a valid complaint. I'm not talking verified. I mean, there's no way to have a complaint given there's no person to cite. There's no personam jurisdiction. If there's no person, there's no activity. There's no activity, there's no territory in this state. And you listen to that video, she'll tell you exactly what in this state is. It's not where you think it is. It's not the state you think you live in. Now, there's been an analysis on the emailer that goes through. It's a little bit too much. In my mind, that has to be done. You don't have to jump to the full faith and credit clause and this and that. If you want to jump into the 18 U.S.C. 31 to prove it's for hire, because you can't do it in your state laws, you say that the commerce can't go contrary to this code, and therefore it must. And then you do a show cause. You get 10 days to show cause how that's not correct. So what have I done? I presented the law, did a show cause. They don't want to show it. I have the demand then is that if there's nothing shown within 10 days that this case shall be dismissed, or the officer not dismissing is again in violation of 18 U.S.C. 4 for a fraud and other things. And you got deprivation of rights there. I can go on and on. I don't want to get too lost in that part. So again, there's so much you can do. There's so much that is done against us wrong. There's so much that's ignored by these people in costumes that you and I don't have the force and power to do more than my mind is to make the record of the complete criminal nature of the organization you're before. I don't necessarily think you have to get into telling them how much you know about what they are. That they're usurpers, occupiers, it doesn't matter. There are these guidelines, these due process guidelines, the failure of any one of which is a fraud on the court. That the officer overseeing that has an obligation and duty. All these officers have obligations and duties. You have to make that statement that they have the obligation and duty, and they owed that to you to do justice and provide due process, that justice would be done. You say that anyway, even though you're facing a criminal who doesn't care less. Why? Because that's the attachment on them, that oath and obligation. I don't even question their oath. I assume they've done it. They can show cause how they haven't done it. I don't worry about that. Or did they sign it just right? Why are you worrying about some trifles when if you attach it to them, now they're obligated and they have an obligation and duty to at least their own code that they've failed. That brings them into liability. And you show the harm that you're now suffering. And that could be all kinds of things. I don't want to even get on that side. It's up to you to think about. So again, I'm just talking right now to give a range of ideas. I couldn't possibly jump in to tell specifics. Neither, I don't think I could anyway. I can say right away, if you haven't found that the name that they charged is not in the state, that's a vital piece of evidence that counters the whole citation. Given that you find a name that's like the one that they're charging, then you'd find out who owns that name. It may not be you. Then you say, oh, no, I'm not this guy. You got to go after these people. You just got to play this kind of fluid. I'm now looking at seeing a lot of little things done here, subpoenas dus tecum. I'm kind of interested that was done. That's an administrative function by nature, but that's also was looking for the evidence of territorial jurisdiction. You just prove they can't get it because there's no person. No person, there's no territory. I think so. To me, that's a little bit more efficient. Now, again, you got to process this through your own state's statutes, if you will, because that's what the officers of that state are obligated to when they take the oath. That is the rules of this state. And again, I'm always concerned about people getting into jail and all that, not after the fact, but I mean, while they're doing this. I think making this record and being, not that we're not straight up, but I mean, we're kind of straight up with what they're doing, what we're doing, and we don't make frivolous arguments and try to be too much. Listen, standing behind the bar and not entering the bar, it's useless. They're already presuming that you're in it. So what are you doing? I'd go in there and show how that they've called you up without authority is a crime. And I'd have that proof in hand and put in the record. Again, you put that with the clerk, you get your copy file stamped, and you bring another copy into the court, and you hand it to the clerk and the judge and say, there's a crime going on in this case. I mean, it all depends on how you want to play that out. It is pretty free form that way. And that's why another thing, I don't know what everyone's sentiment on how they approach this is different. At least I've learned over all these years and working with a lot of people. Do I worry about this illusionary system? No, it's not illusionary at the point it can hurt you. It's very real. And so deal with it. I just say deal with it. Don't get mouthy with it. Forget all that. So, again, in discussing this, I would certainly ask for a verified complaint. But my first thing, I could care less. If you're into that, I would ask for a verified complaint once I got past the fact that they kept on doing more things after I showed they couldn't even have a complaint. Also, I noticed here, and it's a misconception for people, in that jurisdiction, innocence means nothing. So telling somebody you're innocent means nothing. You are presumed innocent if you weren't in that administrative hearing after you've said you've applied to have that enforcement acted upon you. You're not innocent of that act. So you're not actually innocent either. But all you get to do in that jurisdiction is, what do they say? They tell us, plead not guilty, or nolo contendere. You won't fight it. So innocence is irrelevant. Jury trial may be available. We've done the argument, the Constitution said over $20, anything over $20 is a jury trial. You think we've been able to push that through on a traffic case? No, they don't do anything. Again, I would have never thought of being blocked out of the court in the first instance, but I am my own evidence that I will be blocked out of being able to access a court. They don't even want you in and messing with you. So if they're going to do that, just right in your face in the record, for everyone to see, which everyone sleeps through, the crickets are there. If they're going to do that to people and there's not going to be an outrage, they're going to continue to do it. And so the pessimistic part comes up. So what are you going to do when you try to go in and you think you're going to be doing these things? You're going to get what they gave you, short of what your record says they can't. Because everything they gave you is going to be exactions of every kind. You don't think federal law is already working in that court? Title 42 U.S.C. 1981 tells otherwise. You will pay exactions of every kind. And who will pay? Those citizens of the United States who are resident in a state, in this state. So I'm looking here and seeing that the putting this has been held off because this judge is having trouble with this case apparently, and the recusals and all, and they keep putting everything on motions calendars. Stop writing motions, start making affidavits and challenging jurisdiction that says they don't have the authority to put you on the motions calendar. It's not a motion to dismiss. It's more of a petition and demand based to dismiss, to set aside essentially the citation for lack of jurisdiction. And this is the pre-plea remedy and avoidance. Now that you may not be able to recognize until you remove your plea, would be rescind your plea because of deception or disclosure, or the fact that you didn't know that the court would mistreat your case in the face of all these failures. But given you produce the failures in the record with an affidavit, then you attach that to an affidavit to set aside, remove the to rescind the plea, the entry of the plea, get you in a pre-plea condition, and then you assert that they have none, would be the steps backwards. See, commerce requires you undo those things you've done properly. You undo them in reverse, and then you can stand on that first point. If they ignore it, then you come back out at that point. Now they've proven that they'll ignore it. You turn around and do this other thing like 18 U.S.C. 4. You do fraud on the court by the judge. The judge is an officer in the court, not the court. You see, you start using all these distinctions. They're all fictions, and they all function as fictions. And so you can learn to play each one off, like we did in our court case. The judge is separate, his office is separate, the court is separate, the place it sits is separate, and you can its establishment is separate. You can attack every one of those. And I just said something as I'm talking. I don't know if anybody knows that. I literally do not know. I literally do not know that anybody in the sound of my voice or may hear this knows that. And yet it's there to be known, well, except for myself. I mean, I've found the judges that don't even know some of this stuff. Well, where'd you find that? Is what they want to know. Where'd you find that? And then they try to pigeonhole you into something that they don't recognize, or some court case they need to hear, and your vested property is before every court case. They don't have jurisdiction to inquire on the question. You have to voice it. You have to have that word in your mouth and say, well, that question's irrelevant, impertinent, immaterial to the fact that you now have no jurisdiction. Doesn't matter where I got that. You see, the presumption is, actually in law, I'm free of that. They presume that it's attached, but when you come back with the first evidence that it can't, the burden now flips immediately to them because you are innocent, even of the act now that allowed them to do what they did. If that's not, you can't say that. You have to produce that into the record. And so you go after all this paperwork. It can be addressed, and it has to be addressed. And it's addressed in different ways, and maybe not so easily as a blanket statement to all of it or any of it. And I really have trouble. I'm kind of hesitating. I keep thinking about this, and I'm really hesitating in giving any kind of discussion on this, but it's so important. Combined up with the amount of people that are interested in that video, or seemingly so, and someone so-called drives without a license, that's completely wrong. But anyway, you know, she's traveling on the road. You don't miss the fact that she's been beat up. You got to be able to understand that's coming and how to confront it. She doesn't tell you any of that. Whether she even knows it, I don't know. What I'm suggesting is the next step to start getting the record showing that they don't have authority at all to interfere with your private nature, your private goings-on. And they didn't have an authority, no matter what they might consider, even if they were the state itself and not an occupier, they don't have the authority. The other side of that is to bring up like that that property grant highway law that says there's no right to impose a code on my use, my congressionally granted use, is contrary to that federal grant and void. Just go find your state court case that says acts of the state contrary to the congressional will or purpose are void. Just pull that out as a reference and have that available. Don't stand on the facts of the case, just the principle. Go find it in some statement that's not a court case. Your court cases are going to kill you as well. I don't like using any of them. I'd probably use them in the secondary. I'd put out the paper. If they try to come back, I'd say, well, wait a minute. You clearly have guidance in this case from before that says that you can't say what you just said. So now what you've just done is another fraud. So again, be careful about straddling the line about being in license and then saying you're not in commerce. Understand, again, as I've said before, you'll see the definition for permits, registrations, certifications, and licenses are permissions to pursue a trade, occupation, and profession. That is the ones in the state. If you're not doing any of that, the license is not needed. But you can't take the license and then say you're not doing it. In the case of the travel and then going into traffic, which is commerce, they have made a provision for your non-commercial activity, and therefore you have no way to get away from that while they have on record your assent and consent by their acceptance of your compliance that you applied to yourself the laws of that state and for enforcement. You've confessed yourself out of a whole lot of defenses. That's why you go back in, notwithstanding any license they have, you go back in and say, well, there was no person liable. Guess what? That impliedly says that the application you have wasn't you. That license that you filed went in the motor vehicle department. That's a satellite office of the Secretary of State that's doing business with the state. It doesn't exist either, actually. If it doesn't exist, then what's the license? The evidence in your pocket that the officer believes he said, whether or not he's there, whether or not the prosecutor could say anything. How could the prosecutor witness what could not be? You eliminate all of that. You don't even get into the discussion and argument. You don't sound so smart about all the stuff they're going to deny in you anyway. You're going strictly on the procedural requirements and that they have not been met. And then more importantly, what I think I brought to the table of all this, you prove that it could not be met. In other words, yes, what's your subject matter jurisdiction, Mr. Uniform Costume Man or Woman? And they go, I don't know. They don't even have a mistake they can make. They don't have a belief in a law they can make an error on then. Is that a silver bullet? No, but at least it starts to set the record of what the problem is. Whether they know it or not, whether they're going to give you qualified immunity on their ignorance, or whether or not they're honest in helping you and did it wrong. Which I don't know many people that really have that happen. Any imposition, interaction with the government, at least in these last decades, has been by a terrorist. Now, do you call them a terrorist? No, they'll laugh at you. And I don't understand. Just go to see the judge. Just take it up with the judge. How many times have I heard that? Well, I learned a little bit after that. Well, if you start putting a law on them, that's what I'm going to say. I'm going to take it up with the judge. Now, you got to answer this question now. That's what we're going to take up with the judge. And I've developed this word in my mouth, as I call it. It's this understanding of how the law is to be applied and how they're circumventing it with anticipation that the people that they say you're going to go to, those authoritas that are in robes and costumes, are going to be the decision against you. And I defeat those guys too. Now, do I defeat them in the sense that they're going to, okay, you got it right, we give up? Are you kidding me, folks? That's how bad it's gotten. And what best you're going to get is like this woman not being harassed. The friends of my friends that do this are not being harassed. They're being left alone. And as long as the local sheriff can go plunder from all the stupid, ignorant people that are probably the worst off in the society, why they don't have insurance, why their cars are all beat up, why their headlights are all out, why they get picked on, why the sheriff can make millions of dollars a month on these people, That organized racketeering thing goes on. They just leave a couple of you all alone. And it was never supposed to be here. So I don't know what more I'm afraid to not afraid, but I just hesitate to go on more. Today is just a lot of ideas on what you have to, what you can think about when you're developing before you even get a ticket. And that was another acknowledgement. You're always coming after the fact of the wrong that's happening to you, and then you have to engage. If you don't set up this thing in the front end right, you're not going to have a way to go after them, even if to tell them the porcupine, where you just keep attacking them because they keep holding on to you, and you keep wounding them, and you keep the embarrassment on them because you're persistent. You're not going to let this happen to other people. But you still have to have your record more right than a question or wrong, certainly. And in this email, and I didn't get through too much of it for y'all, but the listener would understand, and anybody who's been involved in this would understand that there is a certain way to set it up. I don't see that it's quite set up quite right in my mind anymore. That getting on the record that there's no such person, the name from the Secretary of State, and I have to assume all the states are pretty similar on this, especially if they're federal districts. It's all uniform, right? So this makes it easy for us. If you haven't got that evidence in the record, right off the bat, we're kind of backing up, because the presumptions will work against you. And anybody who's been doing this study, the presumptions, every presumption has to be rebutted. And that even may be the ones you don't even know. Now, how do you battle that one? You have to understand, I guess I hope you would appreciate what it takes to really think about this, how these evil geniuses set this cage up around us, a mental and physical cage, in ways that we really don't understand. And so we think we're thinking about it. We think we have an answer, and it really, we're 2 steps, 3 steps, 4, 5, 6 levels deep behind what has to happen. That I sat back and looked at this and watched the system, watched the beast, the creature respond to many different people, and took as good a note as I could, and then started saying, how do I get even through what I don't know exists? And part of that answer was, I just remove everything they need to exist. And if they need a person, a name, I want to remove that. If I remove that, they have no personam jurisdiction over anyone in front of them. In the States, a little bit more tricky, but if I've got nobody stating an application of the enforcement of the code upon me, I have no territory I'm taking up in the state either. That's a side territorial, collateral attack on the territorial nature of the jurisdiction of the venue that you're in. And I say that word venue, all of a sudden it triggers. Folks, do you understand what I'm saying? If you don't, that's how far away from being able to deal in a country that you thought was free, and be able to fight for be free, and how far away we are from maybe actually getting back to that part that was the good part. Again, the government is this framework. In fact, I think that lady says it too, Jacques Fig. I think she says it. The government's just this framework. And she says this structure. Stop focusing on that. It's just a lot of wasted thought. I have to agree with that. So I agree generally with what she was doing. I agree generally that she's been through all the hardships. I will have to give her a big kudos. She's the first woman I've ever seen engage these people this way and actually prevail against them and not go crazy. And that's not a slight to women. I think there's a whole different psychic thing that goes on in women against this system. But this woman has done it correctly. I don't know if it's because she's a foreigner and came here to the United States and started seeing it and just wouldn't give up or what. But she's prevailed, where I've seen many good women go, literally, they go nuts. Now, I didn't hear a lot of horror stories from the woman where she has had her cars crashed and windows busted in and beat up and thrown down and tortured in jail. I don't know about her experience there, the women that I know that tried this, and you see the bully and brute the cops are on a woman's, bearing, that comes against them. So I don't know if she had to suffer all that, and I'm not hoping that on her, but she has fared very well to come through this like, I mean, maybe even better than maybe most anybody I've seen. She still has a big smile and a big laugh in her, which that kind of went away from me a long time ago. And so at that level, she's even better than I think I would be. Although at some level, I'm laughing all the time. The biggest joke against us is we allow this to continue. And I look at thousands and thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands of people, maybe the millions and the billions across the world. We let it happen to us. It's astonishing, just astonishing. So I think from this standpoint, there's not a lot more I can really order. There's not like a thing to do. I've given some ideas. I think you realize to fight this thing from the beginning, the citations, no matter what your position is, you can still show that that legal entity isn't in the state by the name of the Secretary of State. But you got to be careful about, you can't straddle that line to say I got a license applying. I've agreed to apply, consented to apply this stuff, but then I don't give you any authority, and I didn't mean it. I didn't mean that. If that's the case, there's a legal, lawful remedy in the UCC called rescission to eliminate that conundrum for them, because you've caused that as well. And you then set that stone. And if you're in there, then additionally, you should get some declarations. I would try to get some declarations, self-evident, at least on the record, that it means that there is no jurisdiction and that the officers of the state have no authority to continue to interfere with your right to use the road, use the highway as Congress intended and conveyed. So tie it to an authority outside of that, whatever state you're talking to. So I used to see as they say your dual citizenship, the national citizenship and your state citizenship, where I used to look at this and say, well, that's stupid. Why would we want to have more jurisdictions? I've learned about this problem, and now I can use the fact of their difference against them. Or at least so much on paper, and in my I'm settled. I'm certain that's what's going on. And they have no answer for a lot of this. It's not about how much you know and how much you can profess to somebody, how much paperwork you can write. It's about how little you say to do what has to be done relative to the impositions on us. And I hope that's going to do it for us today. Right now, I hope that helped out. We can continue discussion or dialogue as we will. Grimner, thank you very much for all you do at reallibertymedia.com and the Blogcaster page and the archives. And I do hope that the audio was better, or at least working. I'll continue to figure that out. Freedomsnetwork.com, a social network. Folks, jump in. Maybe you can get it together and work all this stuff that I've been talking. Start to inform yourself about this, and so you don't get in yourself too deep. 2 years into something and then try to figure out why everything you know is not really working, because you never learn how to work it. You just learn what you thought you knew. Jules at ucy.tv, thank you for your simulcasting and the broadcast, the past cast and the recast of this broadcast on Thursday, and wherever else the terrestrial broadcasters. Appreciate what you do. Folks, look at the YouTubes and the Spreaker. Like it, I guess, favorite it, because I guess the accounts get more attention. Tell people of the broadcast. I need the help getting the word out, and more specific things to me, like through the email, markonthebeast@yahoo.com. It's better I can talk specifics. Try not to give me a Gordian knot to untie, and I can do a little bit better, I think, than right now working through how that Gordian knot could be untied, or whether it can. Take care. I'll be here next week. Tech diffs and nature willing.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.